afternoon. My name is Doug Holder, and we're here with Poet to Poet, Writer to Writer, and I'm glad to have my guest, Sonia Meyer. Thank you for coming here, Sonia.
Thank you for having me.
January day in 2010. Happy New Year to all our viewing audience. I'll read a brief introduction to Sonia. Sonia Meyer was born in 1938 in Cologne, Germany. Her first memory is not of some beatific childhood scene, but according to what she has written, my first memory is of my mother lifting me onto the kitchen table, put on my winter coat. It was the evening after fellow opponents of the Nazi regime, less vocal than my mother, had been strung up by a nearby railroad overpass and left dangling for all to see. That night we left everything we owned behind. I was not yet 2 years old when we vanished into the hinterlands and forests of Germany, later occupied Poland, to join opponents of the quote-unquote master race. As a child, she didn't learn to play with dolls. She learned to throw grenades. Actually, she was part of the partisan resistance to the Nazis. She carried messages in the braids of her hair to the men who were fighting the Nazis. She has witnessed the Holocaust from two perspectives, the Jews and the Gypsies, and all this time on the run, she used to see the Gypsies in her hideout world. She was amazed that they had still kept horses in spite of the wartime situation. They were the only people, the only partisans who were keeping animals, I believe. And a wizened old gypsy woman made a prophecy to her that you will survive the war, you and your mother will survive the war, and in fact they did. So she's had this fascination with gypsies, and may in fact even have gypsy blood in her. And she has written a new novel that we are going to hope to have out by the Wilderness Press this spring, Wilderness House Press in Littleton, Mass., founded by Steve Glines, called Dasha. And it's a story about a gypsy girl loosely based on your life, correct?
Correct.
Well, I was going to ask you, and by the way, you could find out all about Sonia at soniameyer.com. That's SONIAMEYER.com. And I will give you her bio and news about the book and the Wilderness House Press and anything else that you want to know. Sonia, you've told me that you've lived much of your life as a gypsy. How so?
Well, first of all, during the war, we constantly moved. And afterwards, when I was rescued from Germany by an Italian uncle, we traveled constantly. We moved between the States and Italy and the rest of Europe. They traveled a lot. And then when I first married for the first time, I lived in Finland. And when I divorced, I really traveled all over the world. Mm-hmm. You know, I had enough knowledge to make a living so that I could move from country to country, which I did. I was very fascinated in those days by traveling.
Okay. And you had a lot of jobs, a lot of
yes,
experience.
Many different professions.
Now, an article, actually, let's see that our friend Susie Davidson wrote a wonderful article about you in the current issue of the Jewish Advocate. And in the article, you say of the Jews and the Gypsies, you're trying to establish the parallel. Or here are two European minorities. They are almost opposite in their culture, but they were both persecuted for different reasons and continue to be viewed as outsiders. Now, I was going to ask you, how do the Nazis view both groups, and how are Gypsies and Jews almost opposite in their culture?
Well, the Jews, of course, are a very literate culture. Mm-hmm. Their whole culture revolves around the Torah, mm-hmm. and education plays a major role in Jewish life. Mm-hmm. The Gypsies are an oral culture, mm-hmm. right from the beginning. So they've never left any traces of their passage behind. And they are great poets, but their poetry is for a particular occasion and then forgotten. Mm-hmm. And there was one famous poet, Papusha, who was a Polish gypsy.
Spell that for me.
I think it's Papuzza, Papusha. And she was the first gypsy poet to actually publish her poetry, and she became famous, but she then was discarded by the gypsies, who do not want non-gypsies to know any part of their lives.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And how did the Nazis view the Jews as opposed to the gypsies?
Well, my personal opinion is that with the Jews there was an envy, which to my mind is the worst of all hatreds. They were powerful, they were famous in academia, they had famous artists, and frankly I think Hitler needed their money for his wars. Mm-hmm. And so I think this was an excuse to persecute them, the whole racist issue.
But you said the gypsies they sort of admired, I remember you telling me, in a way, and they hated in a way.
Well, the Germans had this romantic view of the gypsy, as free and footloose, and, they were artistic, and their music sort of went straight to the German heart, and German sentimentality. And so, especially the nomadic gypsies were crime-free. Mm-hmm. So the nomadic gypsies were, in fact, less persecuted than the partially integrated gypsies where, petty crime set in. So the gypsies was a love-hate sort of relationship for the Germans, and they lured them, very gently into concentration camps at first, by promising them opportunities for work because there was high unemployment, and they couldn't make a living. So it wasn't the same at all.
How many gypsies were killed? I know 6 million Jews were killed.
Well, estimates vary because, of course, the gypsies, many of them are not registered. They're paperless. And so the estimates go anywhere from 250,000 to 1.5 million.
Out of a population of how many gypsies?
That was 75% of the whole gypsy population was eliminated.
So it was almost the percentage of Jews that were eliminated, I would think.
I think as a percentage it's probably even higher.
Yeah.
But now there are believed to be 12 million gypsies living in Europe. Mm-hmm. So they've really come back as a population. They have a very high birth rate.
Okay. Why is that?
Well, to a gypsy, children are the biggest wealth of all. And so they marry very young. The girls marry very young. They used to marry at age 12. And, children was what their whole culture centered around. Mm-hmm. So, to a gypsy, children is everything, or are everything.
Now, the Russians were liberators, but they were often no better than the Nazis with rape and pillaging the populations. I remember Holocaust victims talking about when the Russians came in, they were sort of traumatized. How did the is this a true characterization? I mean, when you saw the Russians, in a way, they did liberate you from the Nazis, but was it sort of anticlimactic?
Well, I have to say, whereas the Germans, whatever they did in a very cold, calculated way, mm-hmm. The Russians, don't forget, the Russians lost 25 million people during World War II. And so when they invaded, they would keep the first stormtroops drunk. Mm-hmm. And for these, initial day or two, they were allowed to do whatever they wanted to do. So they would rape and, pillage. But you really I can't compare it to what the Germans did at all. Mm-hmm. And I never felt the same kind of abhorrence towards the Russians that I felt towards the
Although
Germans.
Stalin inflicted on his people probably.
Stalin was a horrible dictator and, probably worse than Hitler. Only Stalin killed his own people. Hitler killed other people.
Well, Hitler killed his own people, German Jews. in a
Well,
way,
correct,
yeah.
correct. Well, in
Yeah.
there to that, but he didn't consider them as Germans.
Right,
I mean,
right,
that's what the whole thing was about. But with Russia, I think you didn't have that cold calculation. So that I personally, you just lived through it and it's war. I mean, war is always terrible, no matter who fights it.
Right.
When you're on the ground, it has no laws and anything goes. You have no protection when you're in a war zone. And so the Russians were no different from a lot of other people fighting wars.
Okay. And the Americans too. I mean, not to that extent, but I think,
Well, I happen to have very good experiences as a child with American
Right.
soldiers
Right, good.
because they were the first ones to really help us, as we fled, the Russians. So I think that American
Yeah,
soldiers...
probably the best, yeah.
I think so, yes.
My father was a World War II veteran, so...
No, they behaved extremely well.
Now, do you think, how did the United States view gypsies? Do you know?
It's very interesting what happened to the gypsies here.
No, I mean, and during
You
World
mean-
War II.
I don't know whether they
Yeah.
ever came across gypsies.
Really?
Don't forget that the ones I came across were nomadic forest clans that had escaped capture. And there weren't that many of them. But for some reason, my mother sort of drew gypsies to her. And that is very unusual. And that made me question whether there wasn't gypsy blood in my family, and probably there is.
Okay. She made an ambiguous comment about your grandfather, didn't she?
Well, no, when I asked her, about before she died, whether my grandfather was gypsy, she said, look, I wasn't born under a wagon. You have to be a gypsy to know that. So I think that he never admitted to being gypsy, and he married non-gypsy women, but he worked in the circus. And I think it is a good thing he didn't admit it, because otherwise we would certainly have been killed.
Now, do you think there can be an actual Holocaust, again, of Jews and gypsies to the extent where millions could be killed like they were?
Yes.
Why so?
I think right now what is going on in Europe with the gypsies is a form of Holocaust.
But no one's taken them to gas chambers and
No, it
millions
is
of
not
bullets.
organized killings, but in Czechoslovakia they're walling them in, and then you have these neo-Nazis
But there's no
firebombing.
government-sanctioned killings.
No, no, there is not.
So what I'm asking is, would there be a plan, like Hitler had a plan with,
No, I
you
don't think
so?
so.
Something
No,
like
not
that
in
again?
Europe. Not in Europe.
So when you say Holocaust, what do you mean?
Well, I mean, it is they are sort of persecuting gypsies. They don't give them rights, although these rights are written in the
Right.
European Constitution, but they are not enforced. They're fingerprinting gypsies in Italy. They have to wear signs, I think a yellow something, a ribbon.
That's frightening.
Yes. So
That's reminiscent of the Holocaust, yeah.
yes. So and the fire bombings, etc. You don't have the organized mass killings that you have, but the atmosphere is there, I think. And it's a very frightening thing, and the Europeans are trying very hard to combat that. But I think the gypsy population is a big problem to the new United Europe, because what happened is when countries like Romania opened the borders to the United Europe, they had been marginalized for many centuries. They're uneducated, they've lived in poverty, so they come totally unprepared to Europe, and where now they are not accorded either the rights to live nor work permits. So there is nothing often left to them but steal for survival.
Now, if you had, I mean, it's the gypsy is this very, I mean, it's just as mysterious as a gypsy is. The definition of a gypsy to a lot of people is very mysterious. I mean, and I'm always trying to define things. I guess that's just my nature.
Yeah.
And so, what if you had to define gypsy? What would you define? How would you define it?
Well, gypsy is an ethnic group who came from northern India, and they actually came from different tribes, and they were drafted to fight a Muslim invasion, and they avoided war by becoming nomadic. And they really became the gypsies in diaspora. And now they have a very strong culture, they have their own language, and they have a different outlook on life which doesn't quite fit into modern life patterns anymore. So they have to change as well in order to make this whole integration work.
Okay. Now, you have, as we discussed before, you have a book coming out. We hope to have it out. You hope to have it out in what, the spring?
In
right?
spring, officially June, but in spring, yes.
In the spring.
Yeah,
Dosha.
Dosha.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Now, tell us about this book, the genesis of the book, and you know, anything you want.
Yeah. Okay, Dosha is the story of the Lovara, a nomadic Russian gypsy tribe of horse dealers. They were considered the aristocrats among the gypsies because the horse is holy to the gypsies. And the gypsies lived freely in the Soviet Union, in fact, in Russia, up to Khrushchev. So it first tells the story of when they were still roaming free under Stalin. Then they get entrapped and standardized into the Soviet system by Khrushchev during the thaw, when he was liberating Soviet rules. He sort of took their freedom away. And so then they plan to escape to the West. And this is basically the story of their tribe. And Dosha is the granddaughter of a very powerful Lovara king, and by legend, she is supposed to be the next leader of the Lovara.
Okay. And this book is available through the Wilderness House Press, and you can find out more information. It's an extensive history on the site of SoniaMeyer.com. That's SoniaMeyer.com, and it will give you updates about when the book will be released. I asked you to bring in some reading from the book, and so you've got about 10 minutes, as we said. And,
Okay. Just to preface a little bit, I've taken a section of the tribal life while it was still tribal, and the dying of Azra, who is Dosha's mother, and who caused the death of her mother when she was born, and therefore cast a curse of misfortune until the Lovara. And with her, the curse is supposed to die. Call of the Owl. Lengthening shadows trailed the slow-moving line of caravans and wagons as they climbed the steep rise to the outer edges of the taiga. By then, the blood red of the late fall tundra had bleached into lifelessness. Up on the plateau, the ground had hardened. Birch trees stood starkly bare and white against the dense conifers that created shelter from fast-sweeping winds and the deepening cold. Winter was about to invade the desolate Arctic vastness with killer force. The soft ground was covered with an icy crust that gave way under the weight of the passing wagons and caravans. To camp for the night, the Lovara chose a marshy clearing encircled on three sides by dense forest and bordered on the north by a swift river. Night was falling like a heavy curtain across the fading glow of the early afternoon sun as the caravans positioned themselves in the shape of a semicircle open to the river. A subtle but distinct physical separation from the rest of the tribe had gradually evolved between Azra and the rest of the Campania, like the distance that will develop between a dying horse and its herd. Azra's caravan was securely positioned in the lineup, but with empty space on both sides. The Lovara walked close to one another. They spoke in whispers, careful to stay out of earshot of Azra's only child. Her time has come, they said. Azra is dying. Observing their suddenly secretive behavior, Dosha guessed their thoughts and words. Eyes flashing belligerence, she walked up to them and stated out loud, "My mother is not about to die." Dzumila threw them damning glances. "Hush," she said, stepping close to Dosha. Azra could hear. The Rom and Romney scattered to prepare for the night. The children fed and watered the goats and geese before walking to the edge of the forest to gather firewood. The Rom fed and watered their horses, never losing sight of Dosha, who insisted on looking after her own two horses. Suddenly the stallion snorted, spun around, and stood tense as a bow. Several voices shouted, "Watch out!" Like a dark, spread-out sail, a silent shape came billowing from the gloomy hide of a fir at the edge of the tree line. The stallion's head snapped up. With dilated nostrils, ears pointing forward, the white of its eyes showing in fear, he followed the steep drop of an owl. A few hands above ground, the silvery bird broke flight and hovered for a second or two in place. Eyes glistening, it swiveled its head from side to side before it flew on with a powerful upswing of its widespread wings, skimming the marshy surface. Reaching the river, the Arctic owl slowly, with deliberate control, descended as if to land, its dark claws briefly touching the rushing water. Instead, it threw its leg back towards its body with the same slow control and headed downstream in soundless flight, searching for prey. "Mulesklu Shiriklu," Dosha whispered, "the bird of death." She watched the last glimpses of the snow owl's flight reflected in the sudden stillness of her stallion's eye. All eyes were on her. "It's passing us by," she said. This time, she defiantly looked up into the circle of eyes. In awkward silence, adults and children alike returned to their chores. The Rom started to tie their haltered horses by their lead ropes in circles around some of the bigger trees. This left their hind legs free to strike out should wolves get hungry and move in for an attack. It also prevented them from bolting should sounds or movements frighten them. Dosha tied her own horses to a tree closer to her caravan. In the middle of the night, the owl returned. Its piercing call woke Dosha from a deep sleep. The haunting screech pressed down on her breath like a choking hand. Gasping for air, she sat upright and opened her eyes. The darkness around her was absolute, as was the absence of noise. Not even the dogs were moving about the encampment. Only her mother's raspy breathing reached her from the other side of the caravan. Dosha wondered whether the owl's cry had been a dream. She moved from her own dun, her feather bed, over to where her mother lay. There, sitting cross-legged on the floor as she awaited the dawn, she listened to Azra's fading life. At daybreak, Dosha left her mother's side to do chores. Closing the caravan door behind her, she fed her horses and led them to the river to drink. But afterward, instead of harnessing them to the caravan, she tied them again to the tree. Having done that, she walked over to where Dzumila stood talking to the men. Some Rom had trapped small forest creatures which lay by their feet. The Romney had lit the fires and were preparing the first meal of the day. They turned to look at her, Dzumila and the men. Their dark eyes collectively focused upon her as if they had been expecting her. Dosha felt the ground beneath her feet start to shift like dunes on a stormy day. "My mother's time has come," she said. The circle of dark faces and questioning eyes fuse and started a dizzying spin. "You must," she ordered in a loud voice, "pitch a tent by the path that has led us to this clearing." Her voice reverberated like an echo. "My mother must die and be buried along the road we've traveled. Like any," she lowered her tone, "true nomad." Dosha felt her legs starting to crumble under her. One of the Rom held out an arm as if to catch her should she fall. She straightened up, turned, and walked alone back to her caravan. She sat down in front of the closed doors. Wrapped in eerie silence, she closed her eyes and waited for the violent storm of her emotions to subside. When she reopened them, the world around her had moved solidly back into place. A short distance away, the Rom were using stiletto gypsy knives to cut birch saplings. The women emerged from their caravans and boat-top wagons bearing heavy blankets. Together they erected a tent without walls, a sheltering canopy close to the path that had led them here. Their movements were slow, their faces dark. The tragedy of Azra's birth, when one life was exchanged for another, and the curse it had brought down upon the Kanchisti were about to come full circle. Never would the power of superstition that Azra exerted be greater than at these moments close to her end. For now, the Lovara believed, the spirit or Mulo of Sania, the one who in life had been a powerful sorceress, was about to return to reclaim the infant she had left behind. She would hold her people to account for the quality of Azra's life.
Now, Sonia, you've been involved in a bit of activism for the Gypsies. Recently there was some controversy in Florida and other things. What have you been up to?
Well, the controversy in Florida, because thankfully this is America, turned around and actually for the best of the Gypsies. In Europe, I am fighting mostly for the women to be more empowered to take part in politics, because there is a lot of infighting among Gypsy leaders. And so that is what mostly I've been working on as of late.
Okay. And what's the infighting about among Gypsy leaders?
Well, they're still very tribal. And so there actually is not such a thing as one Gypsy. You know, they've lived apart for many centuries, and they force their own lives, and they have a hard time unifying, which is a big problem for the Gypsy population. By the way, they want to be known as Roma.
Roma.
Yes.
So again, Sonia Meyer at soniameyer.com, SoniaMeyer.com. You'll find her bio, ordering information when the book comes out. Press clips. We just had a great article in the Jewish Advocate by Susie Davidson, as we mentioned before, and stuff in our great newspaper, the Somerville News, and Boston area small press and poetry scene, and other things like that. Also, there'll be a reading at the Somerville Library Central Branch, February 16th for the Ibbotson Street Press at 2 p.m. Hope you'll be able to attend that. And the Ibbotson Street Press is available at Porter Square Books and the Grolier Bookstore, as well as the Harvard Bookstore. It's $8. You can go to the website at ibbotsonpress.com. That's IBBETSON press.com. Next week, our guest will be Celia Gilbert, a poet and a artist living in Somerville, and she has a book out by Blaze Vox Books. Again, thank you, Sonia.
Thank you for having me.
For coming here, and I hope you'll join us next week on Poet to Poet, Writer to Writer. By the way, the site for that is Poet to Poet, Writer to Writer.blogspot.com. And we're right here in Union Square, Somerville, at the studios of Somerville Community Access TV. Thank you again.
Good. So how did it go?
I thought it went well. What did you?
Good,
Did
yeah.
you like the questions?
Yes.
Great.
I thought they were good. No, you were very good at this.
Yeah, I'm good at this. I'm good at
Yes.
interviewing. Too bad I can't make a living at it.
Well, that's the thing you have to find out now. What?
Now, so they're just gonna take, you gotta wait around here for about
Okay.
10 minutes.
Yeah.
They'll finalize everything.
Yeah.
And, you like it?
You liked it?
You liked it.
Oh, good.
And so we'll be in touch, okay?
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Steve, we'll be in touch. You liked it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was good. Had a few extra seconds at the end, but that's all right.
Well, usually I wanted to do that because usually it just cut off abruptly, so it's better for the tape, you know. Besides, you know, like shows they have people talking at the end, you know, in the background.
Boy.
So you want me to put this up on your website?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, great.
I don't think it needs much editing or anything.
I'll make a copy of it and send it to you.
Yeah.
And then
So
I'll link it
anyway,
on my, and then
Richard,
I'll link,
I'm gonna
then I'll
let
link it on
Richard
my
know.
website as well.
Okay, super.
And be great.
No, I thought that went well,
I do too.
considering how lousy
You
I
won't say
feel.
anything different when I leave. will you?
No, I like it. Look, I think, you know, if something doesn't work, we should...
Yeah, he's
be
gonna use the
honest.
tape too.
Bill?
What's that?
Bill just takes this?
Oh, no, Steve keeps it.
Want me to keep it? Oh, okay.
I don't know, speak to Bill, I don't know how it works. I think you,
I thought you could make a CD. Can you do
they,
A DVD, yeah.
but we'd have to go in, you'd have to actually come in here and do it. I mean,
That's okay, I'll
you're
get somebody to
thinking
do it, that's all right.
You have a pen?
Yeah, yeah.
Just put the label on it, you might have to do it there.
Let's see, I'll just put it in my pocket. I don't, it's the only thing in my pocket.
Right. That'll do it.
Richard a call. He's gonna come and pick me up at 1:45.
At what time?
1:45.
Oh. Go get a cup of coffee or something.
All right, pal, so
Okay,
great
well,
to see you.
really,
Good to see you,
thanks.
good
Yeah,
to see you.
Yeah,
We'll see you in the
Thank you.
spring again, I hope.
yeah. Oh,
You
no,
ready?
I
Yeah, I have to
will,
go.
you know.
See you later.
All right.
Well,
Too bad I couldn't meet your husband, but, you know.
he's gonna, you'll meet him.
Okay.
Well, we'll have something at the business school when he's, you know, when we're there.
Great,
I
okay.
mean,
Let me
if
guess,
for
this is
some
a
reason-
rerun.
Yes.
If for
That's
some reason-
Is that yours?
Oh, yeah.
Jeff Dam
Yes.
Christmas show.
You know, if for some reason I have to come back for something else before I'm coming back,
Yeah.
we'll arrange that.
All right, well, that's great.
Okay.
Take care.
You want to wait here, or, I mean, you don't have to wait here. Yeah, so let's,
Oh, soon as I get there.
how was the week? How was the week? Yeah. But I wasn't there.
Hey, Vaughn?